Our speaker tonight is Dr. Robert Michael Pyle, and his talk is titled A Pylean Potpourri in Silver, Copper, and Blue. Bob was a mentor to Idie Ulsh, the founder of Washington Butterfly Association, and he has studied Washington butterflies since 1964 and since 1967 alongside Jonathan Pelham. His books, Watching Washington Butterflies, Butterflies of Cascadia, and with Caitlin LaBar, Butterflies of the Pacific Northwest, um, they have been our companions in the field for 52 years alongside his Audubon Society Field Guide to North American Butterflies. He is an essayist, poet, and novelist, as well as lepidopterist and ecologist, and he has a fifth collection of poems just out called Swimming with Snakes, and he is currently working on a sequel to his novel Magdalena Mountain to be titled The Silver Satyr, which he'll talk about tonight. Bob was a founder of the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation in 1971, and he is an Honorary Life Fellow of both the Royal and American Entomological Societies. So thank you so much for being with us tonight, Bob. We're honored.
Thank you, Paulette. Thank you for that beautiful introduction, as you always do. And thank you and everybody in WABA for, excuse me, handling these programs and lining people up. I hope I can do honor to all those who have preceded me. I've got a frog tonight. I'm sorry. We'll try to get the frog out as we go along. My program is going to be multifarious. It's got 4 sections. The middle 2 are shorter than the first and the fourth. I'm going to stop between each section for questions. And I'm going to try to be brisk because when I studied nature interpretation at the UW with Professor Grant Sharp, I'll simply say that I have twice the number of images tonight that would have got me a flunking grade back then. So I'm covering a lot of territory. I've got a lot of images. I'm going to try to be brisk and not to linger and tell too many side stories. But I do want to give you the full context for each of the stories. These potpourrian sections, excuse me, I'm going to go cut a particular light in the background that's bugging me. Thank you. These sections each have to do with the particular enthusiasm or involvement of mine with butterflies over the past few years, and all of them are currently active at present as well. In spite of the title, Silver, Copper, and Blue, I'm reversing them. I'm going to be talking about copper first, then blue, then some more blue, and finally silver. I'll begin with the copper part. I imagine you all recognize this copper as the Mariposa copper. With this checkered fringe, it's orange zigzags, it's deep brown, and of course it's a male. You all know that. And here's the female. Now, both of them look quite a bit like purplish coppers on the upper side, but they vary a lot. And it's the underside that really makes this species, we called it Lycaena for many years. Now we say, thanks to Jon and his scrutiny of the literature and the appropriate science, it's now known as Pharsalia as the genus, and the species is Mariposa, which of course means butterfly in Spanish. So this is the butterfly. And here's how you really tell them, by the very, very distinctive underside pattern, especially on the hind wing. Different shades of gray and brown, but with that kind of dot, dash, dot pattern. I've always called this the Morse code butterfly because it kind of comes in dots and dashes. It's immediately recognizable in whatever manifestation it takes. And that's what the rest of this part of the talk is those different manifestations. You can see there that this individual is imbibing salts from the sweat of somebody's hand, who probably thinks that it is his or her special friend. This was a special friend of many of us, Sally Hughes, the late Sally Hughes, I'm sad to say, perished way too young a couple, 3 years ago from a gallbladder brain tumor. But when she had just retired from teaching at Oxford after a distinguished teaching and botanical and museum studies career. But Sally and I were espoused many years ago, and a number of you here will know her, not many, but certainly Jon Pelham knew Sally well. And this story starts with Sally because when she and I were both students at the, no, I'm sorry, I'm not there yet. Forgive me. This starts with Sally because when I was working on my doctoral research at the University of at Yale with Charles Remington, nobody wants to spend the summer in New Haven, so you do your research out west. And Jerry Powell used to say, Powell's law was no one conducts their research within 1,500 miles of their home base. But I did my research on the ecogeography of Washington butterflies to come up with a set of Washington butterfly provinces against which we could measure the distribution of nature reserves and land set aside for biological purposes in Washington. So I was trying to gather in the summers of 74 and 75 as many new records as I could to add to the already substantial database maintained by Pelham and Shepard and Pyle at the time. This is even pre-Hinchliffe. So one place I was trying to go to places in Washington where I knew that there was a potential habitat, but we had no records. So one of those was a place called Ostrom's Prairie, out in the middle of the rainforest of Olympic National Park, a prairie, imagine that. So we went to Lake Ozette, and you might be familiar. Does my cursor work on screen?
Yes, it does.
So you might be familiar with the 9-mile triangular trail that goes from Lake Ozette down to Sandpoint and up to Cape of Lava, the westernmost point of Washington state, where the great macabre find was made of a village covered with mud that became the basis of the exhibits at the Bay Museum, and then back again to the lake. Well, if you go this way, on the northern trail, you're traveling on boardwalk, cedar boardwalk, that can be slippery, but was still preferable to trying to get through the tangle of the maritime rainforest, which is almost impassable without it. And when you go a couple of miles, you come to this bizarre and quite alluring open area with lots of grass, lots of sedge, and of course rushes as well, popcorn grass, and so on and so forth. And on the edges, hemlocks that look almost like cypresses, and some other, of course, cedars, but a big open area. And this is what is known as Ostrom's Prairie. It was the westernmost homestead in the lower 48 states. A man named Lars Ostrom had a cabin there, which is still there as an archaeological resource. The Park Service for a long time, and other people too, thought that prairie was anthropogenic, having been created by Indian burning and sustained by Ostrom's burning. But we quickly discovered that that was not necessarily the case. It had been an indigenous open area because of the presence of bog organisms. The sphagnum moss there, the bog cranberry, Vaccinium oxycoccus, and this butterfly. And this is why the story starts with Sally, because as I and my field team, which consisted of my brother Howard Whetstone Pyle as a field assistant, another field assistant from Ithaca, New York, named David Shaw, and I were all still warm in our sleeping bags. Sally got up before breakfast, went out on the bog, the first sun hit it, and she came back with several of these coppers. And I took one look at it and I said, good God, that's obviously a Mariposa copper, and it's not the Mariposa copper that I knew. I knew the ones from the Rocky Mountains. I lived in Colorado where they did not occur, though I had a fake record that in my collection that a kid thought he caught there, but he really caught in Yellowstone. And I knew the Northern Rockies population mostly from F.M. Brown's book, Colorado Butterflies, which is my New Testament. I knew this was Mariposa, but I said, that doesn't look at all like Mariposa. So from that moment on, from that moment in a summer's day in 1975, I knew that that butterfly was special and would someday have its own subspecific name. And that butterfly was distinct not only, by the way, for its extremely broad submarginal pale area, almost silver orbs that none of the others have, but also the females were very, very pale on top. This one's a little bit worn, but even the fresh females are very pale on top, very distinctive. So they were nectaring on the different species of gentians and sanguisorbis. I'm not sure they really nectared on this gentian. It might have been too deep for them. But there's one called, is it Douglas gentian? A little white one that is abundant there, and they nectared on that above all other things. But we were on former unceded Makah land, right next to the Makah Reservation, though it was now National Park Service. And so from the get-go, this butterfly became called the Makah copper. And I always intended to name it Lycaena mariposa Makah. But the years went by, and the years went by, and this didn't happen. But the name stuck, and the National Park Service and the State Fish and Wildlife and other agencies used the name Makah copper to talk about its conservation because it was clearly a narrow endemic, but also about what to do with Ostром's prairie. How do we manage it? Do we treat it as a bog and burn part of it to maintain the bog? Or do we let it all succeed to trees, which would clearly cause the extinction of this butterfly? So the butterfly complicated things, but it did not have a formal name. Now, over the years, I looked at the Mariposas wherever I went and in museums, and I saw that there was a great deal of variation. They could be basic brown like this in the Cascades. They could be quite grizzly and gray and muddy looking and smaller up in the Queen Charlotte Islands. And they could be a little crisper like this in the Rockies or in the Sierra Nevada, I mean. And those were the three early subspecies named. The Sierra Nevada subspecies in the 70s or 80s, John? I think Lycaena mariposa, and then Mariposa penrosei was named in the Rocky Mountains in the 30s, and then also in the 30s up in the Queen Charlotte's, W.J. Holland, the author of our great Old Testament, which was called the Butterfly Book, named Lycaena mariposa charlottensis. So just among those three subspecies, there was a lot of variation. Well, it took many years, but I'm jumping ahead a great deal here. But finally, I enlisted Paul Hammond of Oregon State University, who is known for his encyclopedic knowledge of both fritillaries and sulfurs and has published vast tomes on both of them. But he's also known for his extraordinary eye, the good eye, they say. The old guys had the good eye, where he could distinguish minor differentiations, let alone big ones, and remember them in a way that I never could. It takes a special kind of eye and mind to do that. And so Paul and I got together once we had convinced Pelham and Shepard that Makah really was a different subspecies. They finally saw that and said, go for it, but we still had to go for it. So we had to spread a lot more material that I had and wasn't very fast at spreading. The Paul was quick, and started going to museums. And in the end, we gathered over 6,000 specimens from many different parts of the species range, and conducted um, a morphological comparison of them all with Paul's good eye in the process. And we, in fact, discerned 9 major distinct um, populations apart from the 3 that were already named. We published a paper. I don't know, do you see me in the little picture in the upper right? I see myself. We published this paper in the Lepidopterist Journal called A Review of the Mariposa Copper, Lycaena Epidemia Mariposa Lycaenidae, with description of 9 new subspecies and a model for their biogeographical origins. Now, that goes into a great deal more detail than I'm going to in the next few slides. So if anyone would like all that detail, and it's pretty interesting, I think, email me, and I'll be glad to send you the PDF with the pictures and everything. So among the 9 new taxa that we determined were worthy of description, of naming, were first of all, of course, macaw. Here, Nectariana sanguisorbum, sanguisorbum, a bog, what's called bog, not sorrel. Forget the common name of it, but sanguisorba. And here you see those almost silvery orb-like submarginal cells that distinguishes it so much in that pale underside of the upper forewing. That's Mariposa, and that's the first one we named. And of course, we named it macaw. We named it macaw because that's what it was from the get-go, and it would have caused too much trouble to do anything else, even though, as things turned out, it should have been named for Sally Hughes. And then we went going down the coast. The next one we come to was a somewhat similar, but much bigger discal lobes of gray poking out into the pale submargin, and some other different traits. And that one I found first, I think I found the first population on the Grays River, Grays Harbor bogs, called the North Bay bogs, which are a natural area preserve of the DNR, just east of Ocean Shores, very near the mouth of the Hump Tulips River. And that subspecies we decided to name for June Preston. Now, Paul and I made a decision to name the new taxa largely after women who have been important in the studies of Western butterflies. Most of the names that had been made were of their partner husbands or of the men who had been doing this for a very long time, but not many women who had been doing this work had been recognized. We decided we'd try to redress that a little bit. We named this subspecies after June Preston, whose husband Floyd and her conducted some of the most important collections of butterflies in the entire country for half a century, and their material formed a lot of the basis of the McGuire Center in Florida and other museums, by which the contemporary taxonomy that we all depend on for our field guides, for our apps, for our conservation and everything else, not to mention Pelham's Meisterwerk, the catalog, depend upon these collections. So that became June's copper, now Thorsalia mariposa junia. And here's the female, which has a very interesting trait that we don't see in any other subspecies. Oh, white spots on the females. Not just the margin, but even in the disc. There it is on bog mirica. And that subspecies occurs in Grays Harbor County and a little bit farther south of the whole river, not north. Macaw's north in a very small range. This is south. It was actually found in 1918 on the Long Beach Peninsula. We have a single specimen, but it's never been found there since, whether because the bogs have been converted all to cranberry bogs that are heavily sprayed, or because we can't even get into the remaining wild bogs because they're so difficult of access. But even though we looked for it several times, we've not been able to find that again south of Grace Harbor County until you get to Clatsop County in Oregon, and there it turns up again where Mike Patterson found it. So it somehow managed in the interglacial to cross the Columbia River. Now, about this time, while we were doing our work, a young woman who works for the Xerces Society named Candace Farrell was doing research for Xerces, and this is my favorite thing that any Xerces employees do, or all my grandkids in a way. Some of them, a very blessed few of them, get to actually go out in the field, and she was doing monitoring of a rare bog type on BLM land on the Oregon coast in Tillamook County, where some very special bog species turn up again. And I'll tell you later why these bogs are there up and down the coast and in the Olympics. Well, there are various reasons, but a couple are very important. And while she was out there, lo and behold, monitoring this wonderful bog, been logged all around it, of course, but the BLM had the sense to leave the bog, make it an area of ecological concern, and then Xerces sent Candace Fallon out to investigate it. And what did she find? A brand new type of the Mariposa copper. She knew it was a Mariposa. She was that good, but she said, this looks kind of weird. And when she sent it to us, we said, oh yeah, that's weird, all right. That's different from many others. And in fact, it is now called Thorsalia mariposa candida for her. Come on down a little farther south down the coast, but up into the hills in the Siskiyous. And in certain areas, not very many, there are some boggy conditions among the coniferous forests of the Siskiyou down there. And there pops up another near coastal population of Mariposa. Again, very, very different from all the others in several traits. Paul was able to sort all these out in his mind. I couldn't have done this work by myself, believe it. And I was really more the biogeographer on the project. He was more the taxonomist. And he was able to say, yeah, this one's different, all right. Well, we had known that for some time, that it was different from the others we knew, but not how much. And there's a female of it. But this butterfly had been discovered by and studied by a woman doing natural history down there among the oh, come on, help me out. What's the heavy metal, the kinds of bogs down there? Somebody unmute yourself and tell me the name of the soils down there.
Well, that's Darlingtonia right there.
That's Darlingtonia. But what are the soils, Kathy?
Serpentine.
Yeah, I got that. Yeah, thank you. The serpentine soils have a special flora and a special fauna. And among them are the Darlingtonia, cobra lilies, and here perched on it nicely, this copper, which was discovered and studied by and written about in a more an artistic way than a scientific way, and illustrated by Mary Petzel, who was a superb naturalist of the Siskiyous. And she became memorialized, and she has passed in this butterfly, which is now called Thorsalia mariposa maria. Come on farther south now into the Trinity Alps of California and the Marble Mountain Wilderness. And a fellow who used to come to our meetings called Rob Furnow had done a lot of backpacking up there and studying the butterfly fauna of the Marble Mountains. This is something that lepidopterists used to do, was pick an area and study the fauna of it in great detail. Now, some of you still do that with your cameras, and that's a good thing. But it also takes some collecting of voucher specimens to get into the laboratories to find out how their distinctive faunas differ from the others. Fortunately, Ron had done that, Rob, and it turns out that the butterfly that occurs there is really pretty different from the others on either side, but it is also bigger. This is life size. No, it's not. That's just checking to see if you're still awake. But it's a big copper. It's bigger on the whole, statistically, than any of the other subspecies. So, yeah, we could have named that after Rob, but we were going strong on the memorializing the women of Lepidoptera. And prior to him, a person who had collected in there and in that area was, oh, there's the female on Pearly Everlasting, was a woman by the name of Ximena or Ximena, I'm not sure how she pronounced it, Ximena, Magdalena. And her father was a banker in Truckee, California. He had a big round tower there that was a famous landmark for a long time. And here she is uh, being sweet to her dad so that he will continue to fund the publication of the journal she started called The Butterfly Farmer, a magazine for amateur entomologists. And she was really the major force in studying the Northern California butterflies for some period of time there. Now, she was doing it by teaching a correspondence course to people uh, to raise butterflies and sell them to the what in those days were the many collectors who have dwindled to almost nothing today. And that was not a bad thing to do. The butterflies were common for the most part, and there were a lot of collectors whose collections formed the basis of the California Academy and of the other great collections we have today. So we went through that period when there was active field collecting, and she was one of their instructors, and she offered them a little economic incentive to do so. But that magazine actually turned out to have quite a bit of important natural history in it. I was able to actually acquire one of the very few remaining complete sets of that magazine, and I got it from Ximena. When I was at Yale, I found the magazine in the library, and I wrote, and I found her, and it turned out she was still alive in her 90s, and she sent me a complete set before she died. That was really wonderful. I've since traded it for a butterfly, for a even rarer book that comes into the final story I'm going to tell tonight. But I'll never get there if I don't get on and tell you that that butterfly is now Thorsalia Mariposa Ximena. Now we come to the east, away from the coast, into the Cascades, and there's a subspecies that we've known for a long time that runs all the way up and down the Cascades. And for a long time, we tried to fit it into the subspecies from the Sierra called Mariposa mariposa, and our early checklists have it thus indicated. But Paul and I could see that it was different on the whole, and it's not, it doesn't even run into the Sierra Nevada population very much, or to the ones on the other side. It runs up and down the Cascades, kind of right through the middle of them, up and down to more or less coincident with the Cascade volcanoes. And it is in damp areas, but not bogs necessarily. It's in bogs, but it's also in some fairly dry forest, where it feeds as a caterpillar on Vaccinium cespitosa, which is very common, low huckleberry with tiny berries at the edges of the coniferous forests. And that butterfly, we decided to commemorate the central landform of our region and of its range, the Cascades. So it became Thorsalia mariposa cascadia. And we did, by the way, envision it as having a one-time, like some other species, in the interglacials, continued around the bottom of the sound, the Saley Sea and the Hood Canal, and up into the Cascades. So there are subspecies in there. Oops, where am I going? There are butterflies in there like the lilac-bordered copper and the spring white and the Vittler's alpine that are there and the Cascades, and they don't have different subspecies. Unlike the lupin blue and the Parnassias, the mountain Parnassian and the and the and the skipper, Holbert skipper, which had different subspecies there. But we figured that didn't. So we named Cascadia to be both in the Cascades and in the Olympics. More on that in a moment. There's the female. But that's what they look at the Cascades. Go a little to the southeast and the northeast into the Blue Mountains and the Okanagan, and you get females. That's a female, not a male. But it's as dark as a male. They're almost black. Very different animal, clearly a different subspecies. And that one became Thorsadia Mariposa tea, named after Tia, my late wife, who was the first to bring it to me in the Okanagan up at Abernathy Creek. And she brought me one and she said, "What the heck is this? It's a female, but it's almost black. It's darker than the males." And I said, "Yeah, that's different." Now, other people had found them there before, but because she first brought it to my attention, that's the one that became Tia's copper. There's Tia. Her middle name is Linnea, Tia Linnea. This is the way that she travels with me now in her driver's license. And there she is among a stand of Linnea, her favorite plant. Linnaeus is twin flower. Cutest driver's license picture I've ever seen. And on now to the next population, a big, wide-ranging deme or a type or morph that occurs to the north of Tia for the most part, and on up into Alberta into the east. And that one, I'll tell you more about in a minute, but we decided to break our pattern and to name that one for a living lepidopterist who has done about as much as anybody to elucidate not only the field work, the field biology of these butterflies, but he's also one of the great genomicists of North America. Felix Sperling, former president of the Lepidopterist Society, as was our buddy and colleague Jon Pelham. And Felix has made a huge contribution to Western Lepidoptera. So we named this one after him. And you notice it's purpler on top than some of the other male populations. And it's got this very interesting black and white pattern below that's quite different from the others. That's the average anyway. So we named that Thorsalia mariposa sperlingi. Well, between sperlingi and Tea and farther to the north, there's this remarkable expression that goes really, really purple. Our purplish copper is named Heloides, because oides means like. And it's rather like the European species Lycaena hella, Helle, which means bright. So it's bright. Our purplish copper is bright, like it, and this one is even brighter. And we decided to go with a descriptive on this one. How could we resist and name it for the goddess Iris of the rainbow? And it is called Thorsalia mariposa iridescens. And it do indeed iridesce. It's gorgeous. That's a male, of course. So here are our dedicatees: Mary Petzel, Tia Pyle, Ximena McGlashan, June Preston, she's having fun there. Boy, it was something to be in the field with her. And Felix Sperling and Candace Fallon. Now, here's the whole schmear. I told you there were 12 subspecies. The first three that were named were Mariposa and in the Sierra Nevada, Penroseae in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and Charlottensis up in the Queen Charlotte Islands, or Haida Gwaii. That, it turns out, it occurs all up and down the BC coast and grades into, at the high elevations, possibly contacts, we're not sure, iridescence, which certainly has a long border with Sperling Eye, which touches down against Penrose Eye, and is in the Cedar Hills, and out in the Bighorns. And then to the west of that is Tia. Now, interestingly enough, we show the border of the Canadian border. And that seems artificial, and it's a totally artificial border. But bizarrely, and John will back me up on this, there are a number of taxa that really do more or less observe the Canadian border, because the landforms change a lot right there. And you can stand on a mountaintop right here on the border. You can walk across it between a couple of fence posts. David Branch and I have done that. And you're looking down into a trench on the other side. The highlands are not necessarily continuous. So that's an odd case of an artificial border that has some reality in nature. And then you come into Cascadia, supposedly here too. Macaw, the most restricted up here, almost most. Junior down here, and into Clatsop, Candia in this little bog, and Ximena, no, Maria, and then Ximena. So that's where we were. But time does not stand still. At the end of our paper, oh, wait a minute. In the paper, we also investigated the biogeography, but you can't experiment with it. So it's all conjectural. But we both read a great deal, as John has, of the impact of the ice, the glaciology on the Northwest in the recent times. And of course, not only the large ice sheets, continental ice sheets, but also the more recent Wisconsin and other smaller intrusions. And of course, this is the last one that made giant impacts on Washington and Oregon. And it's in the melting of these glaciers that left behind a great many kettles, holes in the ground with ice in them, that when the ice melted, they became bogs. And that's one reason. And it occurred on just a local montane basis up and down here too. That there weren't glaciers, but there were still a lot of cold that left behind ice bogs up and down the coast. There's a book called The Peat Resources of Washington that shows these old bogs all up and down. And all of those are potential Mariposa habitats. Well, we also looked at and we conjectured as to how the ice pushed them around to end up with our current coterie of populations. But of course, that's highly conjectural. We also looked at the life history. We did not do new rearing, but we did study what was available, and we found that their larvae largely sort out into two big, and their ecologies into two big separations. The bogwins on the coast feeding on bog cranberry among the sundews, the insectivorous sundews in the sphagnum among the cranberries. And uphill, the mountain populations feeding on huckleberries of different kinds, usually above the forest floor. They are far more abundant and widespread than the bog populations toward the coast. We really have two real guilds of them. And of course, the boggy ones are all endangered or close to it, and the ones in the mountains are not. Back to Felix. At the end of our paper, we invited Felix or anyone else to apply modern genetic genomic sequencing techniques to these populations, to study and to compare and to test our conclusions, which were traditional, old-fashioned, if you will, but there's a reason that they persist, studying the morphology, the phonetics as it's known, and the ecology together, which really is a kind of a Meyerian approach to a whole ecology evolutionary look at how they evolved. But now, of course, we can do cladistics. We can look at their actual genes, and that will tell us whether our suppositions, our conclusions, and our hypotheses hold any water. So we invited that to happen, and to our delight, Felix got interested, invested, and took it up. And that's what's going on right now. In this map, modification of Caitlin's wonderful map she did for our paper, I should have said. The colored places are colored dots are all places we had material from and were in hand. The black ones are where Felix's field teams this summer went out and collected new material to try to do the tests we were hoping for. And they got a lot of material, though they could not find the Long Beach Peninsula Junius and a few others. But one thing that happened, and you know, timing is often serendipitous like this, is that just as this was going on, just as his field teams were out there, another woman who had worked for Xerces, but more recently, and now, if she hasn't been doged yet, works for the Fish and Wildlife Service, Stephanie McKnight, went out to another bog farther down the Oregon coast, way down the coast. And what did she do? She came back with the predicted additional populations. Candace, among others, had predicted there would be more down the coast. Well, Candace found it. And I mean, Stephanie, and look how very, very different it is from any of the others that I've shown you. And so far, a little preview, Felix is saying that this population is looking like being the most genetically distinct of all. So her name is Stephanie. I think you could have a pretty good guess what that species might be named when Paul and I get around to doing that. There's the female, almost black like Tia on the inside, white spots like Junia, but orange on the outside. Again, totally, totally different from all the others. So somebody asked me in Corvallis, are these things inbred? And I said, yes, they're all inbred. That's the whole point of evolution, is that when subspecies become isolated to the point that they brother-sister mate and they become inbred, that's when evolution happens. And evolution happens at the edges, not necessarily in the middle of the population as much. And there's one more little footnote before my questions for the first part. And the next parts are shorter, I promise. First of all, here we have a picture that Caitlin took on her spreading board of two classic Cascadias from the Cascade foothills just east of I-5 in Cowlitz County, where she's doing work for Weyerhaeuser, up in those foothills. Lots and lots and lots of these, and that's what they look like. This is about as far west as they come toward I-5 down there. Well, on the spreading board with them is another butterfly that we had called Cascadia in our paper. Tana Knaus, and prior to her, Bill Yake had collected up at the Wainuchi, up at the headwaters of the Wainuchi, where Regina has been a lot, down at the south end of the Olympics. And lo and behold, they don't look like Cascadia. And as we go back up the Hood Canal to the ones that Tana found there, they look kind of in between a little bit. And so Paul and I are looking at these Wainuchi ones. They look rather like Junia, but they're much higher in elevation, different food plant, different ecology. And we're thinking, well, maybe there's subspecies number 13, and that might be it. And I just got an email from him at the beginning of this talk. We're not ready to do this yet. We need material. But if that happens, I have a nominee for the dedicatee for this subspecies. There it is, by the way, up at the Wainuchi on daisies. Quite different. And that would be Sally Hughes, who started this whole thing off by going out in the bog before breakfast. And that's part one. Are there any questions at this point?
Well, right now there are a couple comments in the chat. First of all, Jon Pelham says that T. Mariposa was named in 1866 by Reakirt. Riekert?
Now, Riekert, that early. That's really early.
1866.
Same guy who named or the Riekert's Blue. Yeah, he was a very active person back then. Thanks, John. I was forgetting it was that early. Yes, from the Sierra Nevada.
And then John and Regina both commented that the common name for Sanguisorda is Burnett.
Of course, that's right, Burnett. Thank you. That's good. Anything else?
No, that's what we have.
Okay, if anybody has to go take a pee, do it. Go ahead. I'll get into the second part. Now, question. for you, Paulette,
Yes.
have you heard back yet from Stu?
No.
Okay, so the plan is that next month, Stu Weiss is going to be giving a talk on what I'm about to talk about.
So
in much
before we
more
go
detail.
on, Bob, can I just ask one question that just popped in? When should we be looking for Mariposas? I think it's from Patricia Moran Hodge, and I think she means Mariposas.
When should we be looking for
Yeah.
them?
What are the time periods to
Well, interestingly enough, I think they're advancing. It always used to be August in Austin's Prairie, and it may be that the northern populations are still primarily in August, though they can emerge in July. But when you come down into Junia, all the way down to Clatsop County, they're flying in June, in late June. And we should be looking for them all summer long, really. And up in the Cascades, they're most common in August, into September, even October. Um, but they do appear in July. So it's a mid to late summer butterfly on the whole. But if you're looking down near the coast, farther south, like on the Long Beach Peninsula, where we hope somebody's going to find them, you might start in June, late June.
Okay, sorry for that interruption.
I don't know if you can hear me or not.
What's that?
I don't know if anyone can hear me or not.
Yes.
I don't have a question so much as a comment. I've been researching butterflies in Yellowstone Park and definitely found the Mariposa copper. And I have seen it nectaring on the gentian. They've got 3 species there, the showy green gentian, the mountain gentian, and the fringe gentian, which is sort of the unofficial park flower for Yellowstone National Park.
Yes.
They seem to come out in the later afternoon.
Wonderful. Who's speaking?
Mardell Moore.
I thought that was you, Mardell. Yes, thank you. You've got great experience there in Yellowstone, and that's, of course, the type location of Mariposa penroseii, which was, by the way, named for a woman. Glad to say, the wife of a supporter of the of Rickert's, not Rickert. Who named penroseii, John? Never mind. Anyway,
What'd you ask? I was muted. What?
who was the author of penroseii?
Oh, that's a good one. I don't know.
I don't either. Anyway, that butterfly occurs. Then what time is that, Mardell, in late July when you're finding them?
Yes, I'm finding them in late July. They seem to come out later. I'm usually there from July until like August 15th.
Around 6,000, 7,000 feet?
Definitely. Everything there is 5,000 or above.
Right. So, and are they nectaring on all of those gentians you mentioned?
Yeah, I've seen them on the showy green gentian. I've also seen them on the pearly everlasting.
Yes, they like that a lot. Well,
Yes,
so they must be crawling down inside those deep gentians.
yeah, I think so.
Thank you very much, Mardell.
So there's another question
Yes.
from John Bauman about whether bogs and fens in eastern Washington have been surveyed, for example, Huff Lake or Holiday Fen.
What places?
Huff Lake.
Huff Lake and Halliday Fen.
I don't know, John. Check it out with Jon Pelham. He's got
Will
the
do. Yeah, this raises interesting questions for me. Like, would you see huckleberry feeders up on the hillsides and then down in the bog, maybe a different kind of subspecies or variation of the copper in that area?
Seems unlikely because of the vast distance to the other bog populations at the coast. But who knows? They've surprised us time after time after time. Wouldn't that be cool if you found some fen populations on the east side that we had no inkling of?
Mhm.
Go get them, man. But don't
All
come
right,
back
I'm
with
in.
any. But don't come back with any. What did Gary? Let's see. Yeah, don't come back with any stinking photographs. We want specimens. No, photographs are fine, but you won't get new subspecies that way. We got to be able to dissect these things and to do their DNA. Thank you. And you're not going to hurt their population unless you're far better with the butterfly net than I am. Okay, part two. And by the way, I'm going to go all non-collecting later in the program. You'll like it. Transition here. I met Sally Hughes at the Monkswood Experimental Station in England when we were both students there in the very early 1970s. And when we were, another student there, graduate student, was a man by the name of Jeremy Thomas. Three of us palled around a lot together. We were all working. Sally was a botanist, but I was working on trying to learn about butterfly conservation techniques being done in England that nobody was doing over here. And Jeremy was there to do research on a particular pair of butterflies, the brown hair streak and the black hair streak, which were two distinctive English rarities that occurred in oak woods. The black hair streak fed on blackthorn, Stramonidia pruni, and I can't remember the species name of this one, the brown hair streak, but it fed if he's on oaks, I think. Anyway, Jeremy was working on the ecology of those two and trying to decide why both species had become very rare and had dropped out of woodland after woodland after woodland. And in time, he discovered exactly what their needs were. It's called their ecology, so that they could apply management techniques to bring them back. And that has worked spectacularly over the past half century. Because it was a half century ago, I'm talking about, when Sally and Jeremy and I were all students there. Well, because he did so well on the black and brown hair streaks, they put Jeremy to work on the rarest of the British butterflies called the large blue. Now, it's not that big. It's not like a morpho or something, but it's about as big as an arrowhead blue, or maybe a little bigger even. Genus Magdalena that has absolutely extraordinary commensalism with ants. They're not only milked by ants in the larval stage, as many of our blues are, and other lycaenids, but they are taken down into the ant nest and they become carnivorous on the ant larvae, and the ants continue to milk them and let them eat their larvae. And then the butterflies pupate in the ant nests, crawl up as an adult, giving off fake "don't attack me" pheromones, and then spread their wings and fly away. Well, you can imagine that this extremely Baroque specialization is subject to disruption at many levels. And so that had happened through land use changes in Britain, and the butterfly had dropped out of habitat after habitat as becoming very, very rare. And so Jeremy, after 50 years of trying to conserve it, they were failing. So Jeremy was put to work on it, but they failed. They did not get enough of the knowledge in time to apply it before 3 bad summers knocked the butterfly out of existence in Britain. The last ones were taken in, like the condors here, but of the last brood, the last male died before the first female emerged in the lab. And so the British large blue became extinct. And this journal was published in memoriam to it. The Journal of Research on the Lepidoptera, in memoriam, Magdalena Arion Eutepharon, circa 10,000 BC to 1979 AD. The wide open spaces are closing in quickly from the weight of the whole human race. Waylon Jennings. Well, it was the loss of that butterfly, and its near loss, that led to the Xerces Society. Because as I was studying that, all of what they were doing in England, I went to a meeting in London in 72, where Graham Howarth, a curator at the British Museum of Natural History, said, if we lose the large blue, it must become a symbol for British butterflies as a whole, so that we lose no more. And going home in the train that night, trying to figure out what I was going to do back in the US with all this stuff I was studying and learning from the Brits and no mechanism to apply it back home, I thought about the Xerces blue on the train that night. I said, hey, we've already lost a blue butterfly. The Xerces blue Here's the male on the left, the female on the right, old specimens from the Cal Academy of Sciences. And I said, good gosh, we could name a society for that called the Xerces Society, and it'd be cool. It'd be X, a great logo for extinction, and X for butterfly wings. And that's what happened. So on December 9th of 1971, the Xerces Society began. Well, come forward. There's the underside, by the way. This butterfly was already noted to be becoming rare in 1875 when Hermann Strecker got a letter. He was in Chicago. He got a letter from Herman Baer in San Francisco way before the San Francisco earthquake that destroyed his collections. And he said, Herman, they always said, Dear Herman, either way. He said, Dear Herman, between Irish hogs and German chickens, San Francisco has become fit place for no insect but louse or flea. And the Xerces blue is fleeing from all of its known habitats. That was 1875. 125 years ago. 150 years ago. And so here's what we had. And they were already noting in the 1950s, blue specialists were Nabokov and others, that the great variation in the Xerces blue would make it a fine candidate for genetic research. That was mentioned in the 1950s, but it was too late. Excuse me, that wasn't the 50s. That was in the late 30s in the genetics labs of the time. But it was too late because in 1943, at a place called Presidio, big military facility just this side of Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco, was gearing up for World War II, had a lot of construction, and ruined the very last habitat of the Xerces blue. And there were several lepidopterists who all claimed to be the last person to see them alive at the Presidio. Probably they all did that same season. But in 1943, that butterfly dropped out forever. Or was it forever? Because years later, a couple things happened. First of all, the Presidio was turned back to the people by the military, by the government. And it's become a great place for the arts and for performance and for teaching and for hiking and camping, all kinds of things, but in particular for habitat restoration of the old and indigenous San Francisco dunes that had been all wiped out by the spread of the city, Golden Gate Park, and so on. And the habitat restoration began a number of years ago. Well, that got me to thinking, because the large blue had come back in Britain by then. Now, how did that happen? It became extinct, right? And extinction is forever. Well, as Paul Hammond says, well, not quite, maybe, because did you see on that memorial plaque, it said circa 10,000 BC. That means that Britain had been completely glaciated about 10,000 years ago. So everything that was there today had been colonized by the continent since then. That meant there were probably fairly near relatives on the continent. So Jeremy Thomas, same guy, and by this time, he's no longer a grad student. He's the Hope Professor of Ecology at Oxford, which is the top ecologist position in the whole country. Jeremy says, we could go to Europe and look for the nearest population to the English large blue. And by that time, they knew exactly how they had to manage the habitat for the butterfly and its commensal ant. The only problem was the ants were there, but the butterfly wasn't. So he brought back Xerces blues from a number of different genetic locations in Sweden, which turned out to be their closest genetic relative, and plunked them down in the revised habitat. And now that butterfly, moving forward now, another 30 years, is abundant and well, no longer endangered, and in some places eating the ants out of house and home, and microevolving statistically back toward the looks of the English large blue. So maybe extinction is not always forever if you have a nearby genetic surrogate that can evolve in process. So that got me to thinking maybe we could do that with Xerces. And I wrote an essay suggesting that about 20 some years ago. It was called Resurrection Ecology, Bring Back the Xerces Blue. It was published in Wings of Xerces and in Wild Earth and in one other place, I can't remember. And for 10 years, there was a resounding silence. And then about 10 years ago, people actually started talking about it. And about 5 years ago, they started talking seriously about it and thinking about doing it. So I was kind of curious, recently, I'm as dubious and maybe scared of AI as y'all are. I'm definitely scared of it. But I thought, let's see how AI does on the history of this thing. Yeah. So I up and went to AI just a little while ago to see what it had to say about this whole thing. And the first words were Pyle Resurrection Ecology. So I was impressed. You don't have to read this thing. But the fact is, they got the story more or less right. I suggested that with a restored habitat, we might be able to bring back the nearest relative of Xerces to its restored habitat. And finally, people were talking about that. Now, there's a couple different ways to do it. And one of them is called de-extinction. It's put forward by the Revive and Restore people and a big company called Colossal. Sounds like a joke, but that's the real name of the company. Colossal. And those are the folks who are trying to bring back dodos, dire wolves, woolly mammoths, Tasmanian tigers, and so on. They even say passenger pigeons. Well, yes, theoretically on paper, that might be able to be done. But they're working with old degraded DNA, and they're working with a vast job. But they're trying. That's what they're doing. And they came in and they said, maybe we could do that with Xerces. Well, let me tell you, that big red X there, that was supposed to be over the whole thing, but I couldn't figure out how to do it because that's not what I had in mind at all. What I had in mind was the large blue method. Go out there, get the nearest butterfly, restore the habitat, bring it back in, and plonk it in there. And that's what they'd already done. Liam O'Brien and Mia Monroe and lots of other people around the Presidio had gone out and Stu Weissman had got. You know what that is? Chalcedon checker spot, related closely to our Colin checker spot, snowberry. And they brought them back and they put it back in the habitat that they restored. And they're abundant there now. They're flying all over the place. I mean, literally in your face. And they did the same thing with the California ringlet, which we now know that our ringlets are a subspecies of, even though they're ochre and this is almost white above. And that's taken very well too. And that's what I suggested they do with Xerces. Well, guess what? That's what they did. They went out, they restored a bunch of habitat, and geneticists from the California Academy of Science worked together with Stuart Weiss of Stanford and other people to determine what was the closest subspecies genetically to Xerces. And it was not the silvery blue subspecies called, because remember, Xerces and the silvery blue have sometimes thought to be different species and sometimes to be discrete species, sometimes thought to be all subspecies of the silvery. In any case, they're very, very close. So they checked all of the California subspecies of silvery that they could get material from, and it did not turn out to be the one called Pseudo-Xerces, which is out on a Channel Island and looks kind of like Xerces, but it's genetically quite different. Where they found the nearest genes was at one in the Marina Dunes, not so very far away, called Glaucopsyche, which means blue soul, which is cool. Glaucopsyche ligdamus sabulosa. Sabulosa means of the sand, just like our sandhill skipper, which is Sabuletti. So Ligdamus sabulosa. And that's the one they brought, and they plunked it down on the food plant that they had restored. And you know what? That was a year and some ago. And first, is San Francisco, remember, and if something weird and cool is going to happen, it's going to probably happen in San Francisco. And so very soon after the butterfly was plunked down, on a big old concrete plinth that had been the base for a Confederate general who got unseated, a gorilla, Guerilla, statue of the Xerces blue appeared on the plinth. I don't know if anybody knows who did it or how that happened, but that's San Francisco for you. And that was justice being done. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. I don't know what became of it. But that was a great evocation of the spirit of this project. And I got to go down there in May, and there is Stuart Weiss of Stanford on the right, who's going to speak to us in much more detail about this, about the biology of how it really happened. And this is, I had it. Mia, speak up.
Darrell Cap.
Thank you, Darrell Capon. Darrell Capon, absolutely. Who is the genomicist at California Academy of Sciences, a hell of a biologist self. And this is Mia Monroe, whose lovely voice you just heard. We all got together in May and got to check it out. And we didn't see the butterfly that day, but the silvery boots have been seen the day before and the day after, and they are there. A year later, they have taken. So Liam O'Brien, who has a wonderful new book on the butterflies of the area, did wonderful art, and there are interpretive posters up in the park for the thing, and there's all kinds of interpretive material, and it's become very, very popular, so popular that Durrell and others are describing that as a media feeding frenzy. And there are stories and articles all over the place in print and online and on the television and the radio. So this has been a great success. So what do the colossal people have? They've got some very cute puppies with big jaws, white fur, maybe a couple of other traits of dire wolves. They got a lot of press, and they have spent millions of dollars to get there. And if they ever get to an animal that really resembles in many ways a dire wolf, they are not going to have any habitat for it. Where are you going to put them? So that the New Yorker, the New Yorker magazine, in an excellent article about all of this, said quite recently, this may be the saddest of extinction of all, because the dire wolf may go extinct twice for lack of habitat. And they've spent millions, and they expect to make millions. Whereas what we've got on our manually restored habitat is not the Xerces blue. No, and nobody ever said it is. It is a surrogate for the Xerces blue. It's still closer to Glaucopsyche ligdamus sabulosa, but it's on the same food plant, it's under the same climatic regime, and it may well micro-evolve back to being there. But for now, we got a darn good surrogate of the Xerces blue, and it's flying there, and it costs under $100,000. And what's even better is it has leveraged millions of dollars of restoration money for more and more restoration of the Presidio into the San Francisco dunes. So I call that a win and a win and a win. And that's the end of that part. Are there any questions about this?
No, just a comment that it's a great story, and it is. And so we're hoping that Stu will come and talk a little bit more about such a wonderful story.
Well, thank you. I hope I didn't steal a thunder. I really don't think I did. It was really intended as a preview and an opening act for Stu. And he'll get into the biology of it, and it'll be far less superficial, and he'll give you the real deal. Okay, the third one is really short, and that's blues again. Now you all know tailed blues, right? And this is our western tailed blue, not an uncommon butterfly in Washington in the right kinds of habitats. And there are many of those, many of them montane, some of them low elevation, some of them even weedy. In fact, I've got the nearest population to me where I'm sitting is about 21 miles from me, and it's right next to State Highway 4 in an anthropogenic grassland entirely made by people in an old borrow pit where the state dumped fill, and there's exotic grasses, native plants around the edge on the rim rock of the basalt. But odd things. There's a hawthorn there, this and that. But there's a whole lot of the pink vetch. I don't know if it's Vicia sativa or Vicia americana, but it's a weedy vetch, goes along roadsides, and there's a population of both silvery blues and tailed blues on that bed. So, both species can also use Vicia craca, the purple roadside veg. So they will use some weedy places. And here's the underside of the western tailed blue. It tends to be quite pale, sometimes almost immaculate. The spots are small usually, and notably the aurora and the scintilla. Now, those are names that Nabokov gave us, but they're generally used for the orange spots and the scintillating or sparkling blue spots that we have near the tail or the tornus, the outer angle of several blues, and they get really big, of course, on the orange bordered blues and the Ackbound blues and so on. And lots of hair streaks have it too. And of course, it's exactly what swallowtails have, the red spot and the blue spot in the tails. That is because of convergence. That has evolved 6 or 8 or 10 times, maybe more, in butterflies in 4 or 5 different families. The fancy spots and the tails. And birds go for that instead of the head. Even on these little tiny scintilla and aurorae, tiny tails, you'll often find them with warblers or flycatchers having taken a chunk out of there. So it works. But only on western tailed blues, usually only one orange and one bit of blue. And they often feed on native legumes, such as here in Waukegan, they like the giant veg, Vicia gigantea. That's where I usually find them. Whereas the eastern tailed blue looks a lot like it. That was Cupido amintula. This is Cupido comentis. But even on the upper side, the dorsal, they have more orange. Notably, visible usually, even a second shadow spot, and the scintilla, visible too. Often those are invisible or barely visible on a western tailed blue on the top side. And then you go underneath. No, sorry. There's the female, which has the orange even more pronounced, and the scintillae. Also got scattered scintillae on the wings, a bit of blue. And then you go to the underside of the eastern tailed blue. Quite a different story, isn't it? These spots are usually bigger and heavier. They both got the cell bars, both forewing and hindwing. But you got a lot more orange usually, a big one, a smaller aurora, and often a third and sometimes even a fourth, with a little bit of the scintilla. The sunlight is not showing the scintilla there, and the tail. Now, they vary, both species vary, and we all know there's individuals that we confuse, but that's their general difference. And there's the underside on, importantly, white clover. Now, it'll feed on a lot of different kinds of legumes, sure, native species, but it's very, very happy on a number of weedy ones. And I personally think its favorite food plant all over its range is white clover, European Trifolium repens, the white clover, which is everywhere. And that's what I collected it on as a kid in the park by my house. Eastern tailed blues, I'm talking about. Well, here is, thanks to Caitlin, the screenshot of the iNaturalist recent reports on the eastern-tailed blue, which does the job very nicely. I mean, it's really an eastern butterfly, isn't it? It's almost laughable how discreetly eastern it is. But, stretches forward a bit with white clover and things, a little more into Nebraska, Colorado. Denver is one of the westernmost records, and that's exactly where I collected it on white clover as a kid. I didn't know I was at the western edge of the range of that species, not counting the West Coast range and this stuff down here. There's two hypotheses. Now, a lot of eastern butterflies and birds extend across the Canadian shield and drop down into the west. But others pop down to the southwest from the east and come up the coast, like the Gulf fritillary would be a good example of that. But this could have gone two different ways. One is it could be native all down here, like here, probably is, and it could have spread quite naturally up without human agency up the west coast. And these could be native. Or it has been posited, the butterfly was found, I think, only in the 20th century in Southern California, named, I can't remember the name of that subspecies. John, pipe up if you want. And
Cisonia.
yeah. And it's a little bit unclear of its relationship to what we have up here and so on. But it could have been an introduction on clover or whatever down here that later spread up to here. And there's probably no way of telling unless maybe sampling, gene sequencing can do so. But that's eastern, okay? That's eastern tail blue. Now, the eastern tail blue in Washington, or in the west, I mean, it's like this. Here it is in California, pretty common, central California, a little bit to the north, a little bit here and there through Oregon, but then up into the Cascades a little bit over here. And then, interestingly enough, in Clatsop County, right out to the Columbia, up to the Columbia almost, and out to the ocean. Mike Patterson has found a number of these places, and he's taken me to see it at weedy locations right in Astoria. And yet I live here in Grays River, in the Willapa Hills, and we have zero records across the Columbia. But there are records in eastern Washington and over into BC. Native, introduced, who knows? Probably native, having come across, who knows? But they're not in any kind of connection to Western Washington. That is clear. Jon Bauman's got them around Spokane. I found them up here, as John and others have, up in the Medellin area and the Pend Oreille. And then I guess they've turned up in the Blue Mountains, huh? Is that Blue Mountains or
No.
Seven Sisters, something like that? It's Idaho. Somewhere in Idaho. And if that's real. But John, you say there's some records in Kitikat County, right?
Well, we had that one record in Kittitas County that I wanted to discount because it was also with a really weird looking azure. Well, it turned out that really weird azure was, in fact, the second brood of Asheri, therefore lending credence to the fact that that eastern tail blue was not, mislabeled. It was actually something that was there. So a singleton, it's just like we call Riekert's blue, Isola.
Yeah.
Just like Isola in Washington. We've got specimens. They seem to be real, but, they're one of a kind.
Did they get there under their own steam or not? We can't tell. So I call it Kitikat County. But anyway, we know they're down here. We know they're not up here. And so I've always looked for it up here. I said, look, if the Mariposa copper could cross the Columbia, why not the tail blue? Well, lo and behold, we finally got a record in Washington, Western Washington. And it was right down here at Vancouver. on Lake Vancouver, on a weedy dike by Lake Vancouver, and is a cool naturalist, very good naturalist by the name of Dan Nelson, who found it there. And he let me know, and I went down to see it and got some vouchers. And indeed, it was the first Western Washington records, but just across the Columbia and their islands from the Washington County, Columbia County records. And then it was found by Dan and someone else a little bit farther north in Ridgefield Refuge. White clover, both places. So I'm thinking, well, okay, it is in Washington. It ought to be down here. And where am I looking? I am looking, oh, well, that's what it looks like in my hills. Here with the mold butterflies, clear cuts and mold butterflies, and locked gates. So, you know, that's why butterflies are so subtle here. But I was looking down around the river, you know, in the refuges, the Julia Butler Hanson Refuge, out of the coastal refuges, plenty of white clover here and there. I'm looking in those places near the river. So imagine my surprise quite recently, a few weeks ago, well, a couple of months now, when I finally found the thing, not even looking for it. I was just up in the hills on a road that I discovered mirabile dictu. It wasn't gated. Most of them are gated. You can't get up there. But this was a DNR road. So I was able to get up into this area. That's my place. This is a bog I want to check out, but I can't get to it. And there are hundreds and hundreds of miles of log roads all through here that I used to, Sally and I, and then Tia and I used to explore those roads ad infinitum. They're all gated now. Can't do it. But I was able to get from the Elocuman up this far. Oops, review. And up the Skamaqua River this far. And up on top, there's a ridge called the Grays River Divide that separates the Elocuman watershed and the Grays River watershed. And they're both up around 2,500 feet or so, stretching up to 3 at the top. And there, lo and behold, I found eastern-tailed blues here and here on 2 different field trips. And this is a place I had visited a lot, but I went there at the end of the season. Everything else was dried up and gone. And there was white clover, and there was the eastern-tailed blue, the only butterfly up there. And what did I discover when I went to Google Earth? That the exact places I had found them were active logging sites. Where I found them up at Grays River Divide was here. Got all the females there. I collected a small series. And the males were over here. Presumably they met. And when I went to Google Earth, those sites were completely covered with logging equipment. And so my hypothesis for the eastern-tailed blue in Southwest Washington is that it follows disturbance. And it won't be the first species in history to do that. And when I say follows disturbance, I think the white clover actually hitchhikes along with the logging equipment. And I'm not at all sure that the butterfly doesn't too. And that these big log trucks, whether by pupae on them or on the clover that's on the logs that are dragged across that habitat, or whatever, are the agent of dispersal of the eastern-tailed blue in Western Washington. The end of that part. Any questions?
No, we're good. Press on.
Okay. Final part. And I'll make it as snappy as I can. But I hope you're surprised to see that, because I was.
It's a great story.
Crazy, isn't it? Well, you can't get farther from the Willapa Hills of Washington, where I live, the subtlest hills in Washington. You can't get farther conceptually, pictorially, or biologically than the high Andes of Chile. And yet that's where I went next. I had grown up in Colorado on the east side of the mountains, east of Denver even, so I was a kid of the Great Plains, not the mountains. But Jim Scott lived on the other side of Denver, and he could walk into the Rocky Mountains. I was so envious of him. But when my dad went fishing, or I could go up into the mountains, and I became enamored of the high country, and in particular, these high rock slides, where it seemed almost nothing could live. And yet there was a guild of wonderful butterflies on the rock slides above timberline. And those were the lustrous copper, the Demoetis checker spot, the Melissa arctic, and above all, the Magdalena alpine. And I fell in love with this butterfly, the only all-black butterfly in the world, I believe, though Arabia Pluto might be close, a couple of others. And this is the drawing from the original plate in Edwards' Great Butterflies of North America, depicting this when soon after Strecker had described it from specimens from Georgetown, Colorado. Completely black butterfly. And it occurs up in those high rock slides where you wouldn't imagine anything living. So I fell in love with the butterfly and its habitat at a very young age. Found my very first one up above Gothic, Colorado, on my 12th birthday. So many years later, I wrote a novel called Magdalena Mountain, in which the human characters, four of them in particular, are all impassioned about that butterfly. I won't say obsessed, for different reasons. They all have different reasons to care deeply about the Magdalena alpine butterfly. So they all go to Colorado. The butterfly brings them together, as it were. They come together and stuff happens. And that's the guts of the novel. I hope some of you have read it. If you haven't, I hope you will. It's cheap, readily available, Counterpoint Press, anywhere you want to buy it. But I suggest bookshop.com instead of Monster, because then your shekels will go to independent booksellers and authors instead of to someone who really doesn't need any further enriching. But I loved writing that novel. I had a lot of fun with it, and I didn't want to give up the characters. I wanted to stay with them for a while. So I decided to bring them back in another book, not about a black butterfly, but with a butterfly at its heart, called the Silver Satyr, or Satyr, the Satyridae or Satyrinae, a subfamily of the Nymphalidae, the brush-footed butterflies, to which both Magdalena and this butterfly belong. They belong to different tribes. This one belongs to the South American tribe of satyrines called Pronophyllini, and they occur only in the Andes, and they're pretty marvelous. And this is the most marvelous of them all. I found out about it, probably saw specimens at Yale when I was there that Charles Remington showed me. And later, a couple of our Northwest Butterfly colleagues, Gary Peters and Andrea Peters, and David Myers and Alex Myers, went to Chile for butterflies, and they both saw this butterfly and gave me faith that it could be done. So I decided, okay, let's bring these characters back together again over the Silver Satyr. Entirely different set of circumstances. Again, we'll have a bit of mystery, a bit of excitement, thrill, and adventure. You could call it a mystery and a thriller, but not really. It's really a full-fledged novel about people and what happens when they care deeply about something in the world, and what happens after that. So they're going to be coming together over the Silver Satyr. But I couldn't write about it the way I could about the Magdalena alpine, which I had known since I was 12 years old, which is now 63 years. So I had to go find out about it. No, it's not. 60 years. Whatever. 60 years. I've known it for 60 years. So I had to go see the Silver Satyr. Well, I'm not a 12-year-old anymore, and it's in challenging habitats. And I needed a new hip. And so I got one. There's the female. See, she has some spots, a little less silver. And this is its range. And I had to betake myself from Grays River, Washington, to the Central Andes in Chile. And the day my surgeon, who put my new bud in, let me go, 3 months after my surgery, I went. I flew down, of course, to Santiago, which is here, the capital of the country, about halfway down. It's a crazy country, you know, way over 1,000 miles long, very skinny. And Santiago's the one really big city in the middle. And it's quite close to the high Andes, where the border is with Argentina. This is all Argentina. Wait a minute. The border is right through here. So Chile goes up into the Andes about this far. And then it's got a long coastline. And I had found out about 3 places where I knew it lived. Art Shapiro had sent me a wonderful description of lots of them by an airport in Argentina. And I thought if I blanked out here, I might fly down there and extend my trip. But it was a long way more to go. But the 2 places I found out about here were right up in here, right up at the pass between Chile and Argentina, west of the city of Los Andes. And the other place I found out about was just northwest of the little town of San Gabriel up here in the mountains here. So northeast and southeast of Santiago. Now, I wasn't as well prepared as I might have been, but I only booked 1 lodging for my first 3 nights. And that was in a nice little cabana in a walnut orchard on a canyon called the River Aconcagua. And I knew that that river ran up into the high Andes, and it was up there that Gary Peters and David Myers had found the butterfly. So I booked in here. I knew it'd be in a comfortable place for the first couple of nights to drive up there and try to find it. And so I drove my rental car up there, up that canyon, up that glacial milk stream. And you know, it's not like the Rockies. It's not like the Cascades or the Olympics. The Andes are largely dry and rocky, and they're not very green in a lot of them. Now, parts of the year in spring, sure, there's a lot more green, but very much of them is thorn scrub. Thorn scrub that's pretty dry. And then you get up in the high Andes, sure, there's some green meadows somewhere, but a lot of it is just plain rock. So heading up that canyon, I was not finding any very appropriate habitat for this butterfly. And I got up toward the top, and lo and behold, it starts going on the worst switchbacks I've ever seen. Now, I've been up Mount Evans in Colorado a lot, where Magdalena lives, and the switchbacks are really something, but they're not like this. Look at this, and lots of trucks going up these 27 switchbacks. And you get to the top of the top one, and there's a level area, and then there's 17 more before the actual pass and the tunnel into Argentina. It's hard to drive because there's so many trucks and tourists, but what you do is you wait for the tourists to all rush up to get behind the slowest truck, and then you got a clear mile back down to the next slowest truck. So I find that I could have clear roadway if I drove between the pods of traffic. That way I could stop in the curves and look at the habitat along the way. It was quite a day, and it ended up at the Lake of the Incas, El Lago de Incas, which will be in the book. A spectacular place. Part of the book will take place here among Incan silver. Silver will be a subtext for the whole book. Incan silver, Colorado silver, butterfly silver. But this was not the habitat for the silver satyr. It was way too high. This is way up around 12,000. Just like Beartooth Pass in Montana. But the butterfly occurs farther down slope in bunchgrass. So I didn't find any of it, and I got home late at night. They were worried about me at the estancia. And I had 2 more days, and I spent those days canvassing the lower habitats along the river. There were some wonderful monumental columnar cactus, much like saguaro. Some very interesting habitats. And I found some cool birds and some cool butterflies, but I did not find the kind of habitat that would support the butterflies. And I was afraid then that I was too late because I was late in the season. Because of my new hip, I couldn't go in January when I wanted to. I had to go in February. February is toward the end of the flight period. And I thought, oh man, if I've come all this way and got here too late, that's going to be a bummer. But everything was dry and I couldn't find much of the bunch grass. Well, when I came home the third night from my local explorations, the local family of the people who had the walnut orchard and a number of other local farms and this estancia where I rented my cabana on the river, they were having a little evening gathering, as they very, very often did. And they invited me to join them. Well, I didn't have much Spanish, and they didn't have that much English, but we made do. And of course, there was a great deal of laughter. And it was one of the most greatest nights of my life. Local tomatoes and avocados and cheese and bread and lots of vino, the lovely red Carbonear red wine of Chile, and lots of pisco, which is a strong Chilean brandy. And by the end of the evening, people drifted away. And there were not very many of us left at the table. And the guitars came out, and the traditional Chilean songs came out, and it was wonderful. But at the end of the evening, the young man who ran the place along with his father, he was a mining engineer who wanted to get away from the mines in northern Chile for a while, so he came back to work at the ranch. He took me aside and he said, "Robert, I am worried about you." I said, "How come? How come, Cesar?" And he says, "Because I drawn them a map and showed them the butterfly online and told them everything I could about what I was going to do." And he said, "This is a great big trip you're going to take. And you don't even have a cell phone." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "You don't speak Spanish." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You are going to die." And I said, "Well, maybe." And I had already been lost a couple times, and I was beginning to question, my plan to some degree. So he said, and this is the truth, he said, and here's where the glory of happenstance steps in, my friends. You all know moments like this. And Cesar said, "I want to go with you." And I said, "Oh, come on, man. I already fired a couple people that were going to go with me and take their girlfriends, and it was going to be, a rom-com instead of a butterfly expedition. I wanted to go on my own." He said, "Nevertheless, I want to go with you." And I said, "I'll think about it." I went to bed. I'd had the wine. I'd had the pisco. I went to bed, and I woke up in the morning when he brought me breakfast, and I said, "Cesar, see," because I decided that I would not only have been a dumbhead and a doofus and a dope and a nitwit and a dimwit and just a dumb you-know-what if I had said no. So I said, "Yes, let's go." And so we went. Started at their alfalfa field, where I caught more butterflies than anywhere else in that canyon, was the alfalfa field at the ranch. I caught about 15 species there and put one of them on his nose. Alfalfa fields are always good everywhere you go. So first we went to the coast because I wanted to go to the coast. I'd been to the South Pacific on the other side, but never this side. So I wanted to do that, but also check out some habitats. There was the possibility of the silver satyr in the Coast Range between there and the coast. So I wanted to check that out. And I also wanted to check out the coastal habitats. There were a number of reserves on the estuaries of the Andean rivers coming down to the coast. They're called humidals, and most of them are reserves with trails. And I walked them as best I could. I got the worst sunburn of my life on my toes that day, which slowed me down a little. But the birds, I know some of you are birders too. And that's not your fault or mine, but I'm a birder too. And the birds were phenomenal. There's a red-bellied meadowlark. That's not uncommon. there's a yellow-winged blackbird. I had lunch a couple of weeks ago with Professor Gordon Orions. Does anybody remember him? The great ethologist of the University of Washington. He's 94 years old now, lives downtown, but he's still with it, and he still gives lectures on this. He studied red-wing sociology big time in Washington. Also founded the first Environmental Institute at the UW. But he studied the red-winged blackbirds of the western marshes and the yellow-headed blackbirds of the East Washington marshes and how they divvied up the habitat when they were together. And then he went to South America and studied the yellow-winged blackbirds and the red-headed blackbirds. And I said, I got to see that. Well, the redheads are in Argentina, but I did get to see those yellow-winged blackbirds. So cool. How about this? This is not a joke. Well, it's kind of a joke, but it's real. That is a hummingbird. There are a lot of species down there, of course, and this is not the brightest one, but it sure as hell is the biggest one. It's called the giant hummingbird. I could feel its weight on my hand. I mean, that bird is bigger than a swift. It's a hummingbird. It can't even suck from the flowers by hovering. It's so heavy, it has to perch to do it. And I really wanted to see it and did. And how about this? It's called the many-colored marsh tyrant, or in the more economical Spanish, siete colores, 7 colors, even more than the painted bunting. So the birding was pretty darn cool, and I really, at the coast, wanted to see this crazy, crazy tern. I mean, terns are nice. I like terns. But this one is just nuts. It's called the Inca tern, and we found him right on the rocks, right off the edge of the shore. So I was very pleased. And when you see birds like this, you realize why some of our compatriots, like Julian Donahue and Paul Ehrlich, great lepidopterists, have also become birders, have gone over to the dark side. Of course, birders talk about, we talk about birders who come butterflies, we call them birders gone bad. But butterflies can go bad on birds too. Anyway, that was good, but the main one I wanted to see was my first living penguins. And we took some doing to find out where this not very well publicized colony of Humboldt penguins are located close enough to the shore to see. And we saw them well, about 300 of them. And that was quite wonderful to see living penguins that far north. And just as cool was in the water between our side and their side, in a little strait there, swimming around, was this animal. Now you might think that's a river otter. It looks just like a river otter, and it is. Its feet aren't webbed, it's got the same tail, but it's entirely, exclusively, 100% marine. And it's called the marine otter, Lutra marinus. It doesn't go up the rivers at all, and yet it has not changed like Anhydra lutris to be like a sea otter. So out of my list of my top 10 organisms I really wanted to see, I think I saw 8 of them. That was pretty cool. But I was getting worried, looking at my records, got to get back up to the Silver Satyr, or I might miss it, and that would be unthinkable, in spite of all this other cool stuff. But the other reason I had gone to the coast was that I really wanted to check out the Chilean seafood. Now, Cesar, who did everything for me. He did most of the driving, all the cell phone work, got our lodgings. He did everything. He was everything from my who was Quixote's companion? Somebody say it. Oh, you know. Anyway, all the way from that to my Sacagawea.
Pancho Sansa.
Yeah, Pancho Sansa. Thank you. He was all the way from my Pancho Sansa to my Sacagawea. He did everything for me, including taking me to these great seafood restaurants. Because as he told me, he said, Robert, the food in Chile is boring. It's very bland. And that was the case. It's not like Peru or Mexico. It's bland food, except the seafood. And I'm telling you, these oysters had come out of Tierra del Fuego, where they were alive that morning. And they were the sweetest oysters I've ever had. And I'm a Washingtonian. But we had to get back. And here we come to the climax, to the Andes, and have one more crack at the Silver Satyr. I did not want to go home without seeing it. And the canyon that we went to was called El Cañón El Oso, El Yeso, Cañón El Yeso. And it looked like this, although that's a springtime picture, showing the lower elevations green. When we went there in January, or in February, it was all brown and yellows, going all the way up to the high Andes. And this was a habitat that had been disclosed to me by a great Israeli lepidopterist by the name of Benyami. Help me out, John. It'll come to me. Benyamini. Well, we went all the way up that canyon, all the way to the top, and again, another grand blue Incan lake. And by the way, I drove those roads because they were scary. Narrow roads up the high edge of those cliffs into the lake, and lots of little shrines, solar-powered blink lighting shrines for the cars that had gone over the edge. So having grown up in Colorado, I drove those roads, not him. But we got up there to the glacier at the base of El Yeso. And there were grasslands up there, but it was too high. The bunch grass wasn't there. The butterfly wasn't there. And so we came back down. We found butterflies, some very interesting pierids, a wonderful coleus, Waldneri, which is as pretty as any coleus I've ever seen. There it is in flight. And some other satyrs. This interesting one, the underside is not too dissimilar from the Silver Satyr, and it's in the same genus, but it's called the black satyr because the upper side is almost all black, like Magdalena. And I got a kick out of that because it's almost like Magdalena and the Silver Satyr coming together. But that was what was next, and that's what we had to find. And so we went to the habitat that Benyamini had told us about. And it looked crappy. It looked like cruddy habitat. It had been grazed all to heck. And there was some bunch grass, but it was grazed down. And there were all these little green planters in which, on a government project, someone had planted a tree that you see in the background, a native tree. It's the source of an absolutely wonderful honey, some of which I was able to buy from a local farmer and still have. But they wanted to get that tree growing on some of these lands that had been overgrazed. But, like so many government programs, a lot of them got planted, many thousands, and then nobody came back to water them. So they all died. But the bunch grass was there, and I was told that the goats graze it all down, and then it comes back in spring. And I didn't get to see that, but I'd like to, because it was that green bunch grass that Doobie, his first name is Doobie Benyamini, had gone to because he was studying the larvae of these satyrs. He didn't care as much about the adults. I think he saw the Silver Satyr funny, but he went there at night and he used ultraviolet lamps to find the larvae of the Silver Satyr in the bunch grass. And he told me there were hundreds of them at this very site. And that's why I thought, well, it looks like heck, but it ought to be there. So we took a cabin very nearby, crazy looking space age cabana with a little grass bowling area, and the same kind of habitat going down to the Rio El Yeso. And I came out the next morning and something shot past me that looked like a bit of silver flume coming off the rapids of that river. I said, my gosh, maybe it's here, maybe we're here. We went up the canyon a little ways to a waterfall. And the waterfall looked productive. Waterfalls often are. There's a waterfall much like this in the Beartooth Mountains, where I found Ineus crixus, the Crixus arctic, flying up and down the rocks, the waterfall, at the Lepsock meeting in the Beartooths a couple years ago. And I thought, maybe it'll be that way for the Silver Satyr. Well, Cesar, who is far younger than me and far better climber, took his little tiny spare butterfly net I had as my backup, took it with him, and went up that waterfall, went up into the higher ground above it, and came back with our first Silver Satyr. There it is. I'm all looking like I caught it or something, but he did. It's a female. Has quite a bit of orange below. Sorry about the Blue Jays hat. And there's his abdomen, full of eggs. Not as clear as it could be. But that was the female. Now, I want to tell you right now, the pictures you're seeing, I did not want to collect the Silver Satyr. It didn't need any vouchers. We knew it was there. It's not in taxonomic question. And I just didn't want to go there and kill them. I wanted to enjoy them alive, though I have so many times with Magdalena, and get the sense of them flying, doing everything they do. So you can ungrit your teeth. I did not collect any of these. I am capable, through great practice, of, as many of you know, handling them carefully without harming them. And they all flew away unharmed. But we did hold them in hand. So here is the first female we caught, and that's what it looks like. There's a Silver Satyr. I mean, they're silver. It's not blue. Looks kind of blue. They're not blue. They are frogging silver. Well, we found an area with a bunch of the planters up above, a certain amount of the bunch grass, kind of a big area across the road from Doobie's site, where there was a big glacial erratic. And for some reason, we had some sightings of them flying past that glacial erratic. So we parked the Silver Satyr seeker, which is, of course, what we named the silver carp, right next to it, and stationed ourselves there for the better part of 2 days. Caught some other interesting butterflies, caught some females, missed a lot of them because they're difficult to catch. And there I am, having caught my first Silver Satyr. Another female, which was fine. And there were only a couple of plants blooming in the area. A weedy little yellow composite kind of reminded me of a rabbit brush, but not nearly as floriferous. And then this. Does anybody recognize that genus? It is the genus Baccharis. We have Baccharis blooming on the Washington coast, but they don't bloom like that. I guess I'm told they bloom in winter. We don't have butterflies out there to use them in winter. Same on the Oregon coast. They're out there a lot, but in winter. But if you go down to Arizona, near the Mexican border, there are arroyo after canyon, after creek, after gully, filled with this Baccharis called creek willow. It's not a willow, and absolutely covered with butterflies. I've never seen more different kinds of butterflies on flowering plants together than on the Baccharis down there in southern Arizona. But here, it was one species, and it was the Silver Satyr. We didn't find many nectaring, but when we caught them and turned them loose on it, that's what they nectared on. And the very first one that Cesar had caught was nectaring on this. And that is a bird strike out of the forewings of a female, not far from the eye spot, to show you that that ploy works. Everywhere there are satyrs with eye spots on them, that works. And finally, a male. That's the underside of the male against the somewhat silvery rock. And here, folks, thank you for waiting all this time. I know it's been a really, really long program. Here's the Silver Satyr. And it's more silver than I could possibly tell you. It's like tinfoil. It's like mylar. It's really the best thing I can compare it to is the chrome bumper of a 56 Buick. And that's how silvery it is. And that butterfly just knocked my eyes out, knocked my heart out. It just made me cry, of course. Just something. Now I did take he took all these pictures. Cesar did. I didn't take any pictures. I don't even have a camera. Cesar took them all, and he took a little video of this. And I tried to include it in the program, but I couldn't figure out how. It said it was there, but it wouldn't play. I don't know how, but it's just as well because the soundtrack, well, I'm not going to tell you what I sounded like, but it would be censored any place. Any place decent, it would be censored. So that was that. And we had to go. We had to go back to Santiago. I had to fly home in the Silver Satyr Seeker. But before we did, the last morning, we went up there one more time. I said, I want to see that butterfly flying all the way down the waterfall from above and all the way down the canyon down to the river. And we spent a couple of hours there just watching the action around the waterfall. A few tourists, very few people, a few other butterflies, not much. And the time was getting to where we really had to go. And all of a sudden, I'm down the waterfall. Don't have a picture of it, of course, in flight. I tried online. There aren't any. Go get the first one. Here came the butterfly, shooting through, down the waterfall, right across in front of us, between the two of us, in front of our noses, flapping down all the way down. And that was that. And by the way, you're used to satyrs being slow and flip-floppy. You know, Ray Stanford called wood nymphs the flip-flops because you go flip-flop, flip-flop, and they can get a little bit of a little bit of a head up when we chase them. And some Arctics go a little faster, but the Arebias, they're not fast flyers. But this thing, it goes fast. It's like a silver bullet. And what was left to say? But hi-oh silver. Thank you very much. And I want to dedicate this to Cesar, without whom, nothing.
Yeah, I think we all should thank Cesar for saving your sorry butt.
He saved my sorry butt, that's for sure. I might have made it through, I don't know, maybe not. And I might have seen the Silver Satyr. But without him, I wouldn't have had a quarter of the experiences I had, not nearly as good. And I'm not even sure I would have ever managed to even catch it. So thank you.
What a wonderful story.
I didn't want to keep him awake in the middle of the night to send him the link, but I'm going to send him the recording of this. And so, Cesar, all I can do, my dear friend for life, we do correspond, we'll do so for life. I thank you very, very much. Muchas gracias, mi corazón. Any questions?
Oh, wow. That was so great, Bob.
I'll go back to the Silver Satyr for questions. Any questions? I know you're all getting ready for breakfast now, but
Yeah, please feel free to unmute. That's each one of those stories is just a fabulous story, Bob. Just absolutely marvelous. Yeah. So thank you for sharing.
very welcome. A little bit much for one talk, but I appreciate your patience.
Well, you know why I came back for seconds then, don't you?
Jonathan, I'm amazed and I'm honored.
Hey, Bob, is there a male in the University of Washington butterfly collection?
John's the person who answered that.
No, as a matter of fact, we do not have this. However, Caitlin informs me that she has a couple.
I didn't know that.
which sea lords over. She has reaching tendrils reaching everywhere in the world.
I'd love to measure that wing.
Caitlin is amazing. And there is a, oh, by the way, the day after I gave this talk at Corvallis, we had one more laboratory workshop the next day. And they bring out trays of specimens of the type of the group we're studying that year, a group of moths, a group of skippers, and they bring out the specimens from the collection, which is one of the reasons collections are so valuable. We learn from them. So uh, Paul or Chris, one of them, had the great idea to bring out a case of Silver Satyrs the next day, and also Magdalenas. So I came into the lab that morning, and there was a case of Magdalenas and a case of Silver Satyr. That was
Wow.
so cool. So they got plenty of specimens there at OSAC.
It's silver and black, silver and black. That's a good combination.
Silver and black.
Not so far away, Gary.
Nope, it isn't. I have a daughter in Portland, so
Might be worth a road
I
trip.
could stage it. Yeah, no.
Lots of other cool stuff at OSAC too.
Maybe I can borrow a specimen.
And even if you could only get down to Kelso, take the train to Kelso and go see Caitlin.
Oh,
She's
I
right
take the
there, and she
train
could.
all
you
over the
take the-
place.
You can take the train to Kelso, and Caitlin will could show you hers.
Thanks.
I'm sure I did not impart the sum total of human knowledge in those long talks. So must be a couple other questions.
So where are you with the Silver Satyr novel?
Thank you very much for asking. You know, Magdalena, I started in 1974 when I was at Yale, and it wasn't published for 42 years after that.
Whoa.
I don't have that much time for this one. So I really want to have it done and sent in to my agent so she can. I don't know if the publisher of Magdalena will take it or not because different people there now. We might have to start finding a new publisher. I don't know. So I really want to have a manuscript in her hands. I'm going to New York in April for the 100th anniversary of the John Burroughs Medal being awarded. And I've been involved with that medal for many years in its awarding. And the 100-year celebration of it is in April at the Yale Cub in Manhattan. So I'm going to that, and my agent is downtown from there, and I want to be able to go and put the thing in her hands. So that's my goal, is to finish the novel by April. I've written about I would say maybe a quarter of it. Yeah. But there's some major parts that I haven't even begun. And you know, the big plot twists are kind of embryonic in my mind. But I've written several sections set in Chile and in Colorado and a little bit back east. And I think I've got it worked out to pretty much what's going to happen. And there's going to be a real surprise in terms of this butterfly and how it comes into the action of the book. And I hope it will be, like Magdalena, pretty much of a rip roar toward the end of the book. Gets kind of thrilling, I think. But then that's me.
Bob, do you care to share a verbal trailer about this story? What?
Well, just a little bit. These people, these four people who were all interested in Magdalena and came together over it. One of them is a commercial collector for museums. One of them is a graduate student whose experience mirrors mine to some extent, but he's not me. A third one is a ditto, some of my experience, but he's not me. Guy named October Carson, kind of the central figure.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah, and he's a wanderer and a beachcomber and a gatherer, and he's always looking for things. And then the fourth, and he loves Magdalena. And then the other one is a woman who has a quasi spiritual ecclesiastical relationship to Magdalena that has partly to do with a head injury based on my brother's, and she identifies with Magdalena. And so the Magdalena word game is all through that book, along with some action that comes in through her persecution up in the high country by a misogynistic monk that chases her across the world, stuff like that. And so that's what happens in that book with a lot of natural history, because I write the natural history of the Magdalena Alpine in alternate chapters all through the book. So it's a natural history essay together with a full-scale novel. That's what I'm trying to do in this book as well. But in this case, some of those same characters will band together to go down with Professor Winchester, based on Remington of Yale, whom you knew, Gary, and you worked with him. You worked with Remington at Yale a lot in your work, Gary. Well, Professor Winchester is based on him, and they're going to go down to Chile to see this butterfly, and stuff's going to happen, but it's going to involve Incan silver and the 19th century Colorado history of silver with H.W. Tabor, and it's going to involve Montezuma and his robe of resplendent quetzal feathers that comes into it, and yeah, I don't know. I'm going to tell you any more than that right now.
No. That's
There'll be
great. Thank
a word
you.
mystery, a biology mystery, and then some action.
You're going to give some love to Cesar too, right under an alias.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Cesar is definitely the model for at least one character. Thanks, John, for mentioning that.
Right.
I think he's going to be both the model for my historic, prehistoric Incan character, and also for a contemporary character. And by the way, it takes place in the 70s mostly. So it's pre-cell phone, pre-internet, just like Magdalena Mountain. There's not a cell phone or the internet to be seen in the whole book.
You might want to check out the political situation in Chile pre-70s.
Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of Allende and
Yeah.
the great poet and so on and so forth. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that's all. That's what you have to do as a novelist. As a novelist, you got to pay attention to the fact, just as if you were a biologist writing a nature book, because you can't make up the fact, or the readers. Some readers will know it, but you also get to make up other stuff and play God and put people into positions, but you have to put them in positions that make historical sense. And so what John says is exactly right.
Well, brother, I got to split you. I'm leaving now. Thanks for the second time around. It wasn't worse. It was better.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
Talk to you later.
Appreciate that, brother.
Okay, any other questions or comments? There's a lot of comments in the chat. I don't know if you've seen them, Bob.
Well,
Basically,
don't make them go away till I have a chance to see them.
okay, well, I'll keep the meeting open then so you can look at them.
Everybody else is free to go. I've got to change my view, right? How do I do that so I can?
So chat, maybe at the bottom of your screen, it should be a button. So that
There's
says
nothing
chat.
there while I'm sharing screen. Oh, stop share. There we go. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah. Now I can see you all. Aren't you sweet to stick around this long, all you people? Let's see who's there. Oh, wow. Hey, Stuart. Hey.
Hey.
Yeah,
There
thanks so
were
much for coming, Regina.
45 people who
Oh,
joined.
Nancy, I owe you a letter. I know that I've missed some people because they've had to go by now, of course. Caitlin Bean, as well as Caitlin LaBar. Yes, well, thank you all. I'm going to look at some chat here and see if I can answer any.
Do you find the chat button, Bob?
I got it, yeah.
Okay.
Running through it.
So just a lot of accolades.
Yeah, somebody said, wow.
Yeah, yeah. That when you first showed the Silver Satyr, that one came up.
John, go get those Eastern Washington bogs and fens. You might find something fantastic. Maybe the dire wolf could be put on the Isle Royal in Lake Superior. You know, that's a great idea, except it would conflict with the actual gray wolf, which has a very, very fine-tuned biology on IOL that's been studied for over 50 years. And somehow I think that the intellectual descendants of David Meach and those Isle Royale wolf people would not take kindly to the dire wolf being dumped in there.
Well, that was until the Isle Royale wolf nearly went extinct in, I think it was 2010.
Oh, did
And
it really? I didn't
yes,
know that.
yes,
Well, if it does, then
it was inbreeding because there were so few
yeah,
individuals.
yeah.
So I think it was in 2010, there were only two individuals left. And so they started a reintroduction program. But it seems almost sadly fitting, to put dire wolves on, on an island where,
Then
the
they could
royal wolves have it basically went extinct. And then,
they, with a very tiny gene pool to start with. You
they're
see,
very tiny.
that's
Yes.
what they did with Jeremy with the large blue. Now,
Yes.
previously in England, there was a butterfly called the large copper, great big, beautiful copper, solid copper ingot that became extinct in the 1870s. And they were trying to conserve it way back then in the fens when the fens were drained. So in the 1890s or so, in the 19th century, they reintroduced it from Germany. And then they tried from Holland. But in both cases, they reintroduced only a few individuals from
Right.
one place. And so a
Right.
tiny gene pool, and they all inbred. And by the time I got there in 1970, they were still there, and they were absolutely um, what's the genetic term? Monomorphic. When there's only one genetic expression. My vocabulary is going at this time of night.
Clones?
No, but they were virtual clones, but there's a genetic state to describe that. Anyway, never mind. They had no genetic variation at all and could only be kept alive as, very maintained zoo animals. So when Jeremy went to do the large blue, he said it was actually Professor Remington who'd written a paper saying, if you're going to make introductions for biological control or for conservation, you've got to get genetic stock from a wide range of donors from different places. And so that's what Jeremy did in Sweden. He got a number of different genetic stock. So when they reintroduced it to England, the new large blue had genetic diversity, and now it's spreading over a variety of habitats and becoming even more genetically diverse.
Yeah. So Don, do you want to unmute and provide your comment on what we're talking about with the genetic diversity and
yes. Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, so yes, I actually graduated from Michigan Tech, so I've been following that study for over 50 years.
Right.
The problem is the island's just too small. It can at most hold about 50 wolves, and that's just too small a population, and they start inbreeding.
Right. I think 60 individuals is what they generally consider the limit for bottleneck populations. So
I'm sorry, what was that number?
60
60?
individuals. Yeah.
Okay, but I have a different opinion on that, in that I think it's a great habitat and they should just let it go and see what nature does.
Yeah.
Reintroducing the wolves, I think, kind of interferes with nature, because the wolves weren't there 100 years ago. In the 30s, they crossed an ice bridge.
Right.
And so it's maybe a case of the species is only a temporary resident in that habitat.
That's a very good point, Don. There are a lot of island organisms that come and go. They pop off, they pop on, they pop off. And if there's future colonization in an ice bridge, so be it. But all that work for, as you say, over half a century, well, it resulted in a lot of good biology.
Yes,
And
yes.
a lot of master's degrees, and some people had jobs, and David Meach did some great biology. So maybe it's okay it happened, but I think you're quite right. And when you look at the dire wolf, these poor little puppies, they're going to get a lot of love they're alive. That might be about all they get, love and kibbles. Because look,
Yes.
dire wolves, if any of you have been to the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles, anybody been there? It's a fabulous place and a fabulous museum. And you go down into one pit where they're still digging at the tar. But in the museum, which, by the way, has a special room of dinosaur stuff for all the people who think they're going there to see dinosaurs, which is a joke. Of course, it's all Pleistocene. But in the museum, there are all these specimens that came out of the pits. Oh, and outside there's a pond, and there's a fabulous, heartbreaking diorama of a mammoth a father, and the mother and the baby are in the tar pit. And the father is, honking at them, and it breaks your heart. But in the museum, there are all these specimens. And one of them is the only human who's ever been pulled out of the pit. And she's in a cylinder, and there aren't any Native American groups who have claimed her. So her remains are still on exhibit, unless I'm mistaken. And that's changed since then. But they have the skeleton, and then in the cylinder, the exhibit used I'm really missing words right now. I'm tired from the talk, I think. What is it when you have a fake, you're making an image that isn't there? Technological.
Hologram?
Yeah, hologram. Thank you. I knew it was there. It was just under the surface. A hologram. They have a hologram that fills in the flesh and dress of this native woman. And then it goes away and the skeleton's there. Very effective, kind of spooky. But the most effective exhibit there, apart from the saber-toothed tigers and everything else, is a wall. I don't remember the exact number. It's like 462 or 570 dire wolf skulls. There were so many dire wolves that fell into the La Brea tar pits. It was an abundant animal in the early Pleistocene. And you know what? It wasn't feeding on moose at Isle Royale, a few moose. They had, along with saber-toothed tigers and other predators, they had this wealth of Pleistocene megafauna. A bunch of species of camelids and cervids and horses and, all kinds of animals that have been gone for between 10 and 100,000 years. A lot of them in the past 14,000 years. But there was a lot of game out there. And of course, one of the theories is that much of the extinction came about because of human overhunting once they got Clovis points and things like that. Pleistocene overkill, it's called. There's still some debate on that. But there was, at the time of dire wolves, in their ascendancy, there was a lot of food out there and a lot of food partitioning among different species. And you think Colossal is going to be able to make the tiniest part of that ecosystem to put those little white puppies out into? It's crazy.
It's a vanity project.
It's a vanity project, and they also say in the New Yorker that they intend to make many millions from it. Unlike these saints in California who are working over and above their minimally paid jobs, some of them in the way of Doge, to make this other project happen for a Xerces surrogate, and they're not being paid anything extra. Nobody's going to make a penny off it, but something good will happen. So yeah, I have my biases too, Don. I'm with you.
Okay. Thanks for the talk. A possible future topic would be butterflies that benefit from clear cuts.
Yes, and well, interesting you should say that, because one of our regular attendees, David Droppers, who didn't come back for seconds tonight, gave a great talk in Corvallis last week. And David, who you might know as...
Yes, I've talked to him at the club and that.
Yeah, he's given us a couple of talks about his long-running research project on the Mountain Loop Highway and its diversity and the sites he monitored there. Well, he's taken on a new project on his own to monitor the butterfly recovery at a great big forest fire site. I don't remember the name of it, on Highway 2, below Stevens Pass. Great big place, really badly burnt. A couple of years ago, was it? It held up the highway and so on and so forth. So David has found several control sites nearby that weren't burnt, and another site that was burnt and planted, and another site that was burnt and not planted. And he's comparing the colonization of butterflies into that clear-cut site. So he could talk on that. I've got some experience with butterflies in the clear-cuts here in Wahkiakum County, and Caitlin has some really interesting data on green hair streaks and others in some clear cuts in Cowlitz County. That really surprised me. So that's a great idea for a talk.
Thank you.
So, Bob, there's another comment from Vince Hark. Vince, do you want to unmute and mention what you put in the chat? So
Oh, hi. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I was very interesting that you found those eastern-tailed blues up in the clear cuts, and you were talking about, how did they get there? And I was just thinking about those roads as being dispersal corridors through what is otherwise, a huge impenetrable forest of Southwest Washington, except for those recent harvested areas that, are disturbed. It's just an interesting way to think about how animals move around that landscape and show up in unexpected places,
No kidding.
Yeah.
Where are you, Vince?
I'm in Olympia.
Okay. No, you're so right. My training is actually in biogeography, and corridors are one of my favorite things. Both streams and rivers, they're so important for butterfly dispersal and lots of other things, but also roads. And when I was studying at Monkswood, along with Sally and Jeremy, one of our mentors there was a man by the name of Michael Way. Do you know Michael Way, that name? And
I don't.
Okay, it's a great name for a person who's studying the ecology of the wayside or the roadside verges. And he studied the roadside verges, as they call them, of England for years. And he found that not only were they major dispersal corridors for butterflies and other beneficial, or use a less valued word, other arthropods, but also reserves for a lot of wildflowers and nectar resources, if they were managed the right way, not sprayed and not cut at the wrong time of year. The roadside verge, and there's a great deal of that going on now with monarchs, a lot of creating monarch habitat along Midwest verges. Now, for the roadside verge to be a dispersal corridor, you got to have two things. You got to have a butterfly that disperses through saltation by bouncing along like a tumbleweed in the wind. They saltate. They go here and there, and they can go a little ways and look, and they got to find more host plants and kick off another brood. And there are certain species that do that wonderfully along corridors, like dainty sulfurs do in their immigration. Painted ladies do that. With the eastern-tailed blue, I think that's what they do too. I think that's why I find them on the vetches, east of Cathlamet, and also east of Camas and on Highway 14. But the thing is, and this is the hard part, that habitat is not continuous. The white clover is not continuous. It's in really quite disjunct patches. So you're either positing, and some of them are very dense forest, and some of them are heavily overhung by brambles and things. And so you're positing either a tiny little butterfly that can leapfrog some pretty big distances from one bit of resource to the next, or else that they get the occasional boost. And frankly, I think both happens. I'm not finding any of these. I look a lot on the lowland habitats where there is some white clover. This is why I think that these two populations up in the high country just might well have had their origin there by hitching on logs, or well, the logs wouldn't be going up, that doesn't work, but on the log trucks, rather than saltating all the way up. But you have to take that into account. I think they definitely do that. And as the white clover spreads, then yes, that country of the clear cuts will be more and more and more colonized by this butterfly, unless it's all shaded out by the dog hair, hemlock, and Douglas fir that they plant afterwards, or unless it all gets killed by the spring, which they do quite a bit. But so far, the white clover is super adaptable. They also might be using the yellow lotus, the bird's foot trefoil, a Lotus corniculatus. That's an extremely vicariant spreading adventitious plant throughout a lot of Western Washington, the mountains and the lowlands. Very good nectar plant for skippers. And I just don't know. Now, some of the rare blues in England, that's their native host plant, bird's foot trefoil, in the chalk downlands. But here, where it's you could say, if you're so inclined, an invasive weed, I don't know if any blues have adapted to it, except the Akmon. I have found populations of Akmon blue in 2 parts of the Western Cascades. There are only 2 of 3 populations that we know of in the Western Cascades, and they're on that yellow lotus. So they're probably going to spread on that. So yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right about those corridors. I just don't know if there's some hitchhiking going on as well.
So relevant to this discussion, there's a book that just came out within the last year or so called Crossings. Oh, I guess it appears backwards, but it's by Ben Goldfarb, and he talks about how roads are influencing the future of the planet by providing corridors and hitchhiking opportunities for a lot of people.
Yeah. I knew something was itching in the back of my mind. That book's been one of the entries for the John Burroughs, so that's why I've seen it recently. Ben Goldfarb's the guy that wrote the Goldfarb wrote the great book about beavers called Eager.
Yeah.
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 And that was shortlisted, but he didn't win it. So he's up again for this one. You're right. That's a read. I haven't read it yet, but I did look in it to see if Michael Way was in the biography. And he wasn't, but he looks like he's looked pretty well into this whole roadside thing. So you might want to look at that one, Vince. Book Crossings by Ben Goldfarb.
Yeah, he's a very good writer. Yeah.
He is.
Yeah, thanks, Bob.
Yeah, we got to recognize that the roads are not always the enemy of diversity. In fact, how many of you have gone butterflying along a roadside? If it's not sprayed, or if the plants have recovered, especially if there's a seep or water running in the ditch, those can be some of the very best places of all, because they're ecotones between the wooded upland and the barren of the road, and then whatever comes next. But roadsides, they can be great butterflying. So yes, they've got to be important for dispersal. I know damn well they are for monarchs.
Okay, so Regina weighed in saying that the fire that I think y'all were talking about was called the Bolt Fire.
That's right. Thank you. Thanks, Regina. Yeah, and it covered a lot of ground, and it just about wiped out. It burned pretty hot and deep. And David's doing really good measurements, and he looked into the history of it. I wish you could. Well, you know what? I'll have David give that talk for this group sometime. It was really good.
Oh, the one that he gave at Northwest Lovesock.
Yeah.
I'll talk to him about it. I didn't realize he had made enough headway to give a talk about it.
We had 1 year's data. You might want to wait for another
Yeah,
year.
I wonder. Yeah. Okay, but that's a great suggestion. And I will check in with him about that.
And I was very impressed that he just went and found this question and set about answering. That's how the best research should go, you know. Don't just follow the grants. You need grants, though I don't think he has one for this. But you go for where the questions are. I wonder, that place is burnt to heck, you know. How soon are the butterflies going to come back? So he figures out a way to measure that with controls so that it's reliable.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Well, this has been a very long, but a very, very interesting, delightful program. So thank you so much, Bob. Really appreciate all the work that you've done and that you're willing to present it to our group.
Thank you, Paulette. I've just been, thank you so much for asking me and for all of you coming. That's a great honor to me. I'm so pleased to have this community. And I've been blessed to be able to take part in this good work we're all doing. And I'm very lucky that, you know, you all know I was real sick a couple of years ago. With my new pacemaker and my new hip, I'm raring to go, and I'm hoping to get out there some more. Might even go back down there to try to see Gordon Orion's red-headed blackbird, which is in Argentina, and then go to Art Shapiro, the great lepidopterist at UC Davis. He sent me, I can't finish the book until I find this. He's done a lot of work on the whites and the sulfurs of the Andes. Art Shapiro, one of our greatest living lepidopterists. And he might be the first person told me about the Silver Satyr, but he sent me a description he wrote of when he got off the airplane in a little airport at an Argentinian Lake District town called Bariloche, tourist place, tiny little airport out in the brush. And he said it was all habitat all around it, and there were dozens of silver satyrs on the wing. I didn't tell you in the talk, but we probably saw a total of maybe 100 in all, I would think. And more than once, we saw more than one on the wing at once, but never a bunch of them. But he saw a bunch on the wing at once, and he wrote the most wonderful description. And in Magdalena Mountain, I have some real lepidopterists under their own names who make an appearance, a cameo. And if I can find that description of Shapiro's, which I know he sent me, he'll be in there with that. And it was just a wonderful description. So I'd like to go back and see them there and see the red-headed blackbird. Maybe I'll do that. I don't know. But thank you all. Thank you so much.
We'll look forward to that next presentation then. That sounds perfect.
I'll have to get Cesar to go with me.
Of course you will. We want to see
His name is Cesar Fuentes is his full name. And yeah, he'd have to go with me for sure.
Of course. Okay, well, thank you so much, Bob, and we'll make this into a recording and distribute it to everyone who came to the meeting. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Bob.
I see you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So thank you, everybody. Good night, and it'll be available in a recording. See you next month.
Thank you.
Bye.